around the fire, where the light dances on a circle of faces, where the heat toddies the spirits and all close-gathered bodies, where, since epochs and eras long before, Native Americans honored the four winds under new and full moons, before the Zoroastrians lit the great fire at Yazda that glows on millennia later, before the Druids, Bedouins, even before Apollo and Vulcan, Ogun, Fuji, Agni, and Granus, Pele, and Mishquatl, when early man made fires in the green dark hearts of forests, in the open mouths of sheltering caves, where across all human time, voices, songs, music, drum beats and heartbeats rose, with the sparks, cinders, and smoke into the sky, toward the sun by day, toward the distant listening stars by night, of lilting kinds, offering, celebrating, and other anciently sacred, wordful and wordless kinds, where some of our own ancestors once surely stood or sat, meditated, chanted, or danced with wild abandon, naked or painted, or hatted and coated, till the last of the embers died out, gave way to the great silence and stillness of the earth around them, of the vast and mysterious world folded and unfolding around them, where we can gather, go further in, invite and embrace our own kindling, crackling, blazing. From the center of our beings, let forth our own fire, to reach and touch, light, and warm every circle of our lives, our living, all our making, all our loving. Welcome to the latest floating poetry broadcast, and thank you for leaning in to the 74th show in my ongoing weekly series, coming to you live from the sun-fired seacoast of Long Island. This is your poet and poetorialist Colin Goedecke, a voice for living our days more poetically, more expressively, more soulfully. Last week we looked into states of curiosity, questionings, wonderings, inside and out, to infuse and inspire our thoughts and feelings, life-seekings, choices, and sense of belonging. This week, a gathering of a kind around the fire, a celebrating of this timeless ritual, and of the element itself, fire, from ancient expressions to modern metaphors to lyrical impressions, and an honoring as well of the autumnal equinox that's upon us as I speak, that's upon the earth this very day. So let's be together for a while here, around fires, hearths, other forms of fire. Do some kindling and sparking, blazing and embering. Yes. I thought we should start, by the way, and I said the 74th show, but this is actually the 75th show of all things. Yes, 75 straight weekly programs. That we might start. This is from the Smithsonian. How conversations around campfires might have shaped human cognition and culture. Rachel Neuer wrote this and said, we can perhaps thank Campfire Storytime for getting us where we are today. Most adults today spend the daylight hours at work. Nighttime is for cutting loose over drinks and food and sharing stories and strengthening relationships. Our ancient ancestors probably weren't so different. According to new research published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, ending the day around the campfire where songs, stories, and relationships blossomed, ultimately shaped cultures, and perhaps even helped develop some of our ability to understand one another, cooperate, and internalize culture. Anthropologist Polly Weissner arrived at these conclusions after spending 174 days living with the Kung Bushmen of Botswana and Namibia. She recorded conversations during the day and at night, and then compared the content of those exchanges. 3/4 of daytime conversation she found centered around work-related talk or gossip. At night, however, more than 80% of conversations centered around singing, dancing, spirituality, or, quote, enthralling stories often about known people, end quote, including tales about, quote, the exploits of distant kin, adventures in towns, local politics, truck stories, elephant stories, or experiences in trance. She describes that fireside setting today as experienced with the Kung people and likely representative of previous generations. She said, fireside gatherings are often, although not always, composed of people of mixed sexes and ages. The moon and starlit skies awaken imagination of the supernatural, as well as a sense of vulnerability to malevolent spirits, predators, and antagonists, countered by security in numbers. Body language is dimmed by firelight, and awareness of self and others is reduced. Facial expressions, flickering with the flames, are either softened, or in the case of fear or anguish, accentuated. Agendas of the day are dropped while small children fall asleep in the laps of kin. Whereas time structures interactions by day because of economic exigencies, by night, social interactions structure time and often continue until relationships are right. Foragers make use of daytime efficiently and nighttime effectively. And she ends by saying such regular interactions date back at least 400,000 years. It could be that these repeated interactions shaped entire cultures and gave us our aptitude for stories and song. The significance of the time our ancestors spent by the fire manifests in a more obvious way as well. Appetites for firelit settings, for intimate conversations, and for evening stories remain with us today. Thank you, Rachel Weissner, for that. David Whyte's poem, The Shapes of the World, on the heels of that. Stooped low on the beach, gathering firewood, round, bleached, and shaped by a gracious weather, I find the eye of mythical totems, the shapes of fish and orcas' fins. My friend tends the fish, I tend the fire. Slowly the fish fries in its round black pan. Beneath, the innumerable shapes of other fish salted by many years burn blue and red and yellow. Our 2 kayaks are turned on a gravel beach, steel-gray light on their upturned bows, while wood smoke drifts out beyond them, smudging the islands guarding the cove. Through those small islands we coasted, skirting the wild weather chasing our sterns, and I remember that as we struck gravel, I felt the shape of things to come. It was as if I remembered how all things fit one to another, and the sound of gravel was the sound of home, and at the place where water meets land, I could meet all things. On the cold beach, we made a nest, a tent shadowed by trees, a small fire, a place to sit, the pure silence of honest work, twigs cracking in the moist air. Above us the young eagle circled, seeking a glimmer in the sea. The waves murmured on the beach, the gravel's voice rising and falling. When we find a home like this, it must be that the old ones come by, join us on the rough log seats, throw their arms around our shoulders, speak lovingly of the eagle, laugh between mouthfuls of fish. Tell us to go back, tell the old stories, how the shapes of the world can speak. Thank you, David Whyte. That Weissner piece from the Smithsonian, I was also looking at Wikipedia, and I was curious about fire worship and what they had to say about that, or the deification of fire, which is actually known as pyrolatry, Pyrolatry. That was new to me. Known from various religions, it's been an important part of human culture since the lower Paleolithic era. Earliest known traces of controlled fire were found at the Daughters of Jacob Bridge, Israel, and dated to 790,000 years ago. Religious and animist notions connected to fire are assumed to reach back to such early pre-Homo sapiens times. How about that? Well, years back I'd done a Poetry on the Plate immersive dining experience, and it was called Table of the Gypsies, so I was researching all about the world's gypsies. the Romani people, and they were fire worshippers, and this is what I found about that. Fire draws them like a magnet. Even in these days of push-button entertainment, there's something special for them about sitting around a good old yog fire, Y-O-G. The smoke-blackened kettles singing away on the kettle iron, ready to make endless cups of strong tea, always required on these occasions. The talk around the fire is wide-ranging. The incidents of the day, deals struck, horses good and bad, people met with, the exploits of the clever lurcher dogs. Each tale more unlikely than the last. All the success and failures of the traveling life, punctuated by snorts of laughter or expressions of sympathy. In my curating all of this, so many interesting new poems and poets I wasn't really familiar with, including the Pennsylvania poet of the past, Robinson Jeffers. There is another nature of fire, not the same fire, but the fire's father. Holy, 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 sing the angels of the sun, pouring out power on the lands and the planets. But it's no holier than a fire in a hut. It is another chemistry, more primitive, more powerful, more universal, power's peak. The fire of the sun and stars and the pale sheet fire of a far-off nebula, a mist fleck at midnight in the infinite sky, a swirl of a million suns dragging their satellites like dark women by the hair through the wild acre. It is with this kind of fire our people are playing tricks and will blast their enemies. How brave we are! I would rather think of the little bale fires that flickered around the night-gleaming Aegean on the peaks of promontories, telegraphing Troy's fall, and that grim queen had her axe whetted when the commander of the armies came hulking home. Fire answered fire, blood cried for blood, crime and reprisal, the bomb and the knife echo forever to no atonement, until annihilation comes leaping like a black dog and licks the dish clean. That is atonement. A campfire in the slit gorge of Ventana Creek flickers on smooth bare rock, the foundation of the mountain. Half a mile higher, a doe looks down from the brink of the upper forest, her fawn staggering behind her. She smells a little trouble of burning. She sees the black of night stuffing the gorge, heavy and solid under the star-gray black basalt idol, stuck in split rock, and under it and right through it a small red point twinkles, terribly alone, reddest of stars, deep underneath, deep in the pit. She focuses on it, her long soft ears, but at that distance it has no voice. Or a turf fire in Connemara, in the black throat of a hut between the bog and the sea. The lean countryman and his toothless old wife sit in its feeble glow. Their children have gone away. They think of past times. There is another nature of fire, but the same fire. Slayer of forest, lion-colored bulks of flame burst through the trunks and the trees crash. Flame runs like monkeys among the branches, and the noise is like the roar of a hurricane on a rock shore. Flame flies out of the tops of the trees like monstrous bats, flapping from peak to peak, hissing in the high air. Blue jay and squirrel, wildcat and coon and wood rat, man and his cattle are caught alive. Thank you, Robinson Jeffers. I was thinking of the comforts of the hearth through time and my own experience of them very humbly one winter in particular. It's called The Hearth. It was written in Morristown, New Jersey, a few years back. The old oven in the cold night kitchen, whose wide mouth I open to warm my chilled hands as I cook a simple supper, sip a humble glass of wine, I feel sure, the same kind of comfort others through time, farmers to storytellers, hermits and wayfarers felt around the good fortune of a sheltered fire and the promise of body-filling food on a deep winter's eve by a welcomely glowing hearth. The Armchair is a poem that I wrote for friends James and Stefania Barham about an old leather chair that they had that conjured up much apropos, I would say, the armchair. Churchill, Winnie, would have ensconced here in his study or club, slowing his roving mind with a bottle of vintage port, warming his silk-stocking feet by an ember-red fire. framing his oratorical lips around a Cuban cigar, or a horn-rimmed writer of 30s mysteries plotting ways for the manor house butler to discreetly do it, and a Scotland Yard inspector to elegantly unravel the twist by examining the rose beds or suspecting the marmalade, or a reader of Auden or Tennyson, Cannell or Ferlinghetti, phrases and pages of pure poetry turning in the glow of lamplight, on a fading afternoon of falling leaves and suspended clouds, wool and wood smoke in the air. Sitting in your stout-hearted, brass-studded armchair, this leather-bound lounger watching lives, loves, and rooms come and go, being weathered by decades of seasons and conversations, yet still offering a welcome seat to all those traveling through time. And here's a poem about a mystical experience I had of a kind in the countryside one, also deep winter. It's called In the Forest of Here. In the heart of winter, I chanced to meet a mythical character, a woodland man, a burly-chested dweller in the forest of Here, in stout sleeves and sash of weathered barks, a figure broad-belted with lichen, bright orange against the virgin snow, his tunic flecked red and rust with fallen leaves, tied with fine and wiry vines, clasped with a silver shaving of ice, the only cold note in his earth-toned body. We made no sounds, he or I, only gestured each with a gentle nod, as we passed in opposite directions, he heading deeper into the woods and winter, me heading back toward home and blazing hearth. I thought a nod to firewater might be in order. So here's a poem that Matthew Sweeney wrote, The Igloo. Outside the igloo he waited for an invitation to come inside. There was no knocker, no doorbell. He coughed. There was no reply. He crouched down and peered in. He felt the warm air from a fire pat his cheeks and ruffle his hair. Hello, he said quietly, and repeated it. The frost in his toes urged him in. So did the pain in his gut. His knees one by one welcomed the snow and brought him into the warmth. He stood up and breathed deeply. He held a foot up to the flames, then swapped it for the other foot. He lay down on the polar bear rug, but a smell yanked him upright again and led him to a dresser of bone where a bowl sat with a cover on it. He lifted this to reveal dried meat. He grabbed a chunk and tore at it with his teeth. It was reindeer. He devoured all that was in the bowl and went looking for some more. He found none, but there was a bottle of firewater which he swigged. He swigged again and left it down. It lay on the bear skin and fell asleep. Thank you, Matthew Sweeney. And here's Mary Oliver's poem. Here's thinking about that, going back to that, the fire of the sun, solar fire. It's called Sunrise. You can die for it, an idea or the world. People have done so brilliantly, letting their small bodies be bound to the stake, creating an unforgettable fury of light. But this morning, climbing the familiar hills in the familiar fabric of dawn, I thought of China and India and Europe, and I thought how the sun blazes for everyone, just so joyfully as it rises under the lashes of my own eyes, and I thought, I am so many. What is my name? What is the name of the deep breath I would take over and over for all of us? Call it whatever you want. It is happiness. It is another one of the ways to enter fire. Thank you, Mary Oliver, for that, for many other poems, some I've shared over time. The autumnal equinox, we're in this today. Very special time. I find all the solstices and equinox special. I do my best to let an ode come into me if it does. This is from 2016, and it's called Feel All the Light Falling, a meditation on the autumnal equinox. Let all the light fall today in a rare, receiving way, fully, equally, wholly into your hemispheres, your north and south, your left and right, your masculine and feminine, conscious and unconscious, actual and potential self. Pause. Close your sunlit eyes and slowly, slowly breathe. Open. Widen. Feel the life-giving, life-renewing rays enter the center, the equator of your body, your being, bringing all parts of your inner world into great balance, bathing all parts of you in greater warmth and health, brightening, lightening your places, crevices, passages of darkness, sadness, hiddenness, shadow. Let all the new light falling, streaming, seeking, find and fill you this day with a keener seeing, sense of turning, promise of becoming. Here's another Autumnal Equinox poem for you, for us. Composed on the South Fork in East Hampton, on Long Island, above the coast where I am, where for years I had a lovely summer cottage, beautiful, magical little place. This is called A Day Like No Other. A day like every and no other, however millions of autumnal equinoxes later. A day of foreshortened, foreshadowing sun into night of new bright planets, starlight in the eyes of newfound lovers. A different wind coming, cooling, freshly through the trees, pouring freely in through the half-open windows. A quieting, now murmuring of earlier clamoring leagues of crickets. A gentling out of a dulcimer summer. A gentling in of a native, infusive, altogether other fall. I was thinking of all the metaphors of nature and flame and fire and things fiery. And in a bow to that was this poem from the Lewontica Brook Reservation in Convent Station, New Jersey, one October, years back. Still molten leaves of sun have fallen to earth, red and yellow flames, flaring veins along the path, grass, familiar water's edge where I walk. They burn brightly in the Indian summer air, in the eye, like flakes of lava, like embering coals, all soon to cool, lose their color, their fire, fade away in the last left days of autumn. I also thought for us about, wanted to touch on the flames of love, sometimes great flames, yes, of passion. What about that? This was a poem from many, many years ago for me, back in Summit, New Jersey, 1992, before I moved to New York City. Started a different life with the woman I'm writing this about then, and for many decades from that point. Tulips, it's called. Hello, Van Gogh, I say, and step inside the painting, a still life that's not still at all. Tulips everywhere, and firelight and music. Colors dance with shapes, lines sway around a beautiful woman, here, present, gazing in my painterly eye. Yes, life, color, firelight, song, tulips, and you. I must sing, Van Gogh. Oh, I must sing. Decades later, a different love poem for a once great love after my marriage, who was also an artist, a marvelous ceramicist among other forms of art. And this was called Inside Your Kiln. A maid of human clay body, shaped by life, love, past lives, that finds its unfinished way inside your embering kiln, to sinter, to fire into other form, to melt, to flow into a strong single mass, porous, sinuous, crystalline. And I'd like to speak of, and you to think of, and feel into your inner fire, wherever that is inside you, and whatever that is. Yours, ours, mine. My soul glows. My soul glows like an ember. My heart flows like a river. Okay. In the heart of winter. Cold, clear, silent, still. Coldness, clearness, silence, stillness. Stars, moon, sun, fire. Starlight, moonlight, sunlight, firelight. Black Wool and Blue Wings is a poem for Richard Cale on one of his winter frolic collages that once he made, and I was so moved by that to a poem. Dear artist friend of 40 years who just celebrated his 85th birthday out in Seattle. Black Wool and Blue Wings. So I'm sending this out to him and all of us, of course, but him especially. The black wool smelled of snow frost and dusk that early century afternoon. The children wearing it floated like puffs and plumes of wood smoke over the frozen field, while the outspread wings, the ice-blue mottled wings of an outsized butterfly fluttered in the far corners of their eyes, a bright mote of summer or future or wished-for color in the deep winter. I thought as I was curating things of gathering material for us of Walt Whitman's poem By the Bivouac's Fitful Flame. And, you know, in the Civil War, he was attending to the wounded very kindly. And he wrote this poem through that. By the bivouac's fitful flame, a procession winding around me, solemn and sweet and slow. But first I note the tents of the sleeping army, the fields and woods' dim outline, the darkness lit by spots of kindled fire, the silence, like a phantom far or near, an occasional figure moving, the shrubs and trees. As I lift my eyes, they seem to be stealthily watching me. While wind in procession thoughts, oh tender and wondrous thoughts, of life and death, of home and the past and loved and of those that are far away. A solemn and slow procession there as I sit on the ground by the bivouac's fitful flame. Feel glow as you will, and maybe into this poem of Kenneth Rexroth's Toward an Organic Philosophy. It's the first part of it. It's Spring, Coast, Range. The glow of my campfire is dark red and flameless. The circle of white ash widens around it. I get up and walk off in the moonlight, and each time I look back, the red is deeper and the light smaller. Scorpio rises late with Mars caught in his claw. The moon has come before them, the light like a choir of children in the young laurel trees. It is April. The shad, the hot-headed fish, climbs the rivers. There is trillium in the damp canyons. The fetid adder's tongue lolls by the waterfall. There was a farm at this campsite once. It is almost gone now. There were sheep here after the farm, and fire long ago burned the redwoods out of the gulch. The Douglas fir off the ridge. Today the soil is stony and incoherent. The small stones lie flat and plate the surface like scales. 20 years ago, the spreading gully toppled the big oak over onto the house. Now there is nothing left but the foundations hidden in poison oak, and above on the ridge, 6 lonely, ominous fence posts. The redwood beams of the barn make a footbridge over the deep, waterless creek bed. The hills are covered with wild oats, dry and white by midsummer. I walk in the random survivals of the orchard. In a patch of moonlight, a mole shakes his tunnel like an angry vein. Orion walks waist-deep in the fog coming in from the ocean. Leo crouches under the zenith. There are tiny hard fruits already on the plum trees. The purity of the apple blossoms is incredible, and the wind dies down their fragrance, clusters around them like thick smoke. All the day they roared with bees. In the moonlight they are silent. and immaculate. Thank you, Kenneth Rexroth. And how about this poem? I knew of him, but I'd never really read any poems by Sherman Alexie, Native American. This is from his collection, The Summer of Black Widows, from 1996, from the Hanging Loose Press. The Powwow at the End of the World. How about that title? I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after an Indian woman puts her shoulder to the Grand Coulee Dam and topples it. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after the floodwaters burst each successive dam downriver from the Grand Coulee. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after the floodwaters find their way to the mouth of the Columbia River as it enters the Pacific and causes all of it to rise. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after the first drop of floodwater is swallowed by that salmon waiting in the Pacific. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall after that salmon swims upstream through the mouth of the Columbia and then past the flooded cities, broken dams, and abandoned reactors of Hanford. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall after that salmon swims through the mouth of the Spokane River as it meets the Columbia, then upstream until it arrives in the shallows of a secret bay on the reservation where I wait alone. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after that salmon leaps into the night air above the water, throws a lightning bolt at the brush near my feet, and starts the fire which will lead all of the lost Indians home. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after we Indians have gathered around the fire with that salmon, who has 3 stories it must tell before sunrise. One story will teach us how to pray, another story will make us laugh for hours, the third story will give us reason to dance. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, when I am dancing with my tribe during the powwow at the end of the world. Thank you, Sherman Alexie. Beautiful, very beautiful. I also, as I riffed around, was thinking about firemen, or firemen, firewomen. I guess you always only think of men, but obviously they're women too. And how they, meet that element so rawly and wildly and so heroically, at least in my book they do. And I came across, when I was living in New York, at one point in the Upper West Side, this gathering of firemen to honor their those who had died in the line of duty. Monumental Men, this is called. Legions of firemen stand under water on Riverside and West End, soaked to the blue of their brass-buttoned coats and stiff round hats as they line the streets in the drenching rain to commemorate all the firemen now under stone, those fallen into the flames of history and the quiet of memory. Monumental men who, too, stood here once to honor their heroes. I thought of blacksmiths and the fires of their forges, and this was a poem for a very dear friend of mine out in California, Dennis Farry. This was on his 73rd birthday because he's a soul brother, and he had done, back in the Ozarks, had done some blacksmithing. Very seriously. It's called Our Farrier. It's funny that his name also relates to that. Man of iron, of great fire, man of worshipful company, shaper, swager, welder of many things, complex to simple, essential, useful. A Vulcan with his volcano of flowing heart, fierce thought. A Vishvakarma, Gofanan, Tubal-Cain, Ogun, who has sculpted 7 remarkable decades and been sculpted remarkably by them and beyond. Today you smith on, strike on, ecstatically, in forging heat, in a bright shower of living sparks. I send that out to him. Okay. I was thinking about writers that I've been fascinated by, especially one I haven't revisited in a long time, I'll call him a French writer, but he had a very unusual provenance of being born. And he has an incredible past, very colorful figure, but he focused so often on the fiery. His name was Blaise Cendrars. Yes, and the book is, in particular, that I want to mention to you, is The Astonished Man. And so I was reading a bit of someone's review about it. He said, reading Blaise Cendrars for the first time is like stepping into another universe. This is a fellow named Lee Rourke wrote this. A direct translation of the name Blaise Cendrars can be read as the first name from braise, embers, and the last from cendre, ashes, and this meaning was wholly intended, so he obviously renamed himself. Fire is an important symbol repeated throughout his work, and this idea of dancing on the burnt ashes of outmoded styles was concomitant to Blaise Cendrars' centrifugal philosophy: be different and create anew. We're talking about a man who, after running away from home at 15 and at various intervals in his life, kept bees and sold their honey for a living, made films in Brazil, wrote influential poetry, enough to make his peers weep long tears goodbye to their turgid, staid and stalled stanzas forever, shoveled coal on Chinese trains, cooked in cafes for the rich, played piano in picture houses, became a watchmaker, witnessed the Russian Revolution in St. Petersburg, traveled with drunken gypsies, lost an arm whilst fighting for the Foreign Legion in World War I, became an art critic, championing, amongst others, Picasso, the Cubists, and Surrealists, amassed and lost vast fortunes and wealth, sailed the seven seas, had a column in a Hollywood newspaper, and much, much more besides. Or so he would have you told. When you look at a picture of Blaise Cendrars, you look at a man that has lived. You look at the man John Dos Passos called, quote, a son of Homer, the whole face a labyrinth of wrinkles and carbuncles that make Bukowski and Auden look like suave catalog models. When people first see portraits of Picasso, they immediately speak of the eyes. With Blaise Cendrars, it's the whole face. So, The Astonished Man. I'm mentioning it to you in case it intrigues you. I was thinking about the fires we make out in nature. We spoke of some campfires and things a little earlier. Don't you love the feeling of that, being out in the wilderness? This was an experience I had in Santa Fe, New Mexico, 1 September 1999. It's called Smoke Signals. Smoke signals from the southwest rise through the morning pines and yellowing aspens, sending blue clouds and signs of life into the high desert sky. Down on the Mayan coast, Mexico, and the Yucatan was an experience demi-mysterious, I'd say. It's called El Acero, the Torchbearer. Just as dark blankets day, a phantom figure with a flame appears and begins to light the braziers lying low along the sandy paths of flickering palms leading through and from Kailum. Then just as phantomly disappears down the winding way with the smoking torch and still secret form. David Wagoner, The Firebringers. You see it first as a spark on the horizon, like a distant campfire, but instead of dwindling as daylight dwindles, slowly it comes closer. You see the firebringer now, the exhausted runner you've waited for, legs almost giving in as he stumbles forward, staring, his mouth gaping like an old young man at the end of a nightmare. And you reach out for the torch before it falls from his numb fingers, take it and turn away to start across long stretches of broken ground in the pitch of the night, your shadow, an outcast whose feet slip swiftly and surely underfoot at every stride, bearing you up, but holding nothing against the earth while you hold light. But soon each breath goes shallower, emptier. No matter how deep you draw it from crosswinds, each breath is casting a shadow through your body, taking your breath away as if you'd caught it only to find it gone, to be caught again and lost again, till its pathway burns more fiercely than yours, or the flame now growing heavier in your clenched fist, and your shadow joins the dance. 2 lame feet make in time to your blood's drumming, and there ahead, half light, half shade, another firebringer waits for you, one hand reaching out toward yours as you lunge to clasp it eagerly, to hang on for dear life. He takes your fire and runs away with it into darkness. Thank you, David Wagner. Another poet new to me in my researches for us, Zachary Schomburg, Chomburg, The Fire Cycle. There are trees and they are on fire. There are hummingbirds and they are on fire. There are graves and they are on fire. And the things coming out of the graves are on fire. The house you grew up in is on fire. There is a gigantic trebuchet on fire at the edge of a crater, and the crater is on fire. There is a complex system of tunnels deep underneath the surface with only one entrance and one exit, and the entire system is filled with fire. There is a wooden cage we're trapped in, too large to see, and it is on fire. There are jaguars on fire, wolves, spiders, wolf spiders on fire. If there were people, if our fathers were alive, if we had a daughter, fire to the edges, fire in the riverbeds, fire between the mattresses of the bed you were born in, fire in your mother's belly. There is a little boy wearing a fire shirt holding a baby lamb. There is a little girl in a fire skirt asking if she can ride the baby lamb like a horse. There is you on top of me with thighs of fire while a hot red fog hovers in your hair. There is me on top of you wearing a fire shirt and then pulling the fire shirt over my head and tossing it like a fireball through the fog at a new kind of dinosaur. There are meteorites disintegrating in the atmosphere just a few thousand feet above us, and tiny fireballs are falling down around us, pooling around us, forming a kind of fire lake, which then forms a kind of fire cloud. There is this feeling I get when I am with you. There is our future house burning like a star on the hill. There is our dark, flickering shadow. There is my hand and fire in your hand on fire, my body on fire above your body on fire, our tongues made of ash. We are rocks on a distant and uninhabitable planet. We have our whole life ahead of us. Thank you, Zachary Schomburg. Okay, let's say our last stretch coming in for a bit. But let me say this to you, listeners, each of you, all of us. Your phoenix is rising. Add to your telling, to Ovid's, Dante's, and Pliny the Elders, but of your own sure rising, rebirthing, regenerating from the ashes and embers of your last life chapters, their great combustions sparked reformations, rising now with a nimbus of rays sunning forth jewel-bright eyes, as Lactantius described, and a crest of wild feathers, into a liberating life, as a being of light, solarity, possibility, longevity, as a spirit of authentic mythic proportion, freeing your wings, taking flight into a newly boundless future. I wanted to draw a few things from this marvelous book called Hearth. Here's the work. Still your mind. Find home again among all that you belong to. Healing has to do with making it in your daily life and in your habits of mind a new and coherent shape, and asking yourself to believe in it and live it out. Healing is making your life a poem again, in which all that you belong to is implied, all grief and all joy, birdsong and books. Healing is a hearth you fashion to replace the one you lost. A hearth once lost is hard to find again, and harder yet to hold. The loneliness that comes with being dispossessed of yourself, the exile from all that loved you once, is a condition that in its nature refuses the very work that would make it well. It takes Job 42 chapters to make his peace with the God in him, to stop fighting the river. It's taken me long enough, too. This is from a Poetry on the Plate immersive dining experience around Hemingway, Ernest Hemingway, that I curated and presented in Williamsburg, Brooklyn back in 2019. Great fun. Everything from the food to the imagery to the stories and poetry. It's called Your Sun Also Rises, and I like the other poem about your phoenix. This is similar, let's say. It rises. Each day you open your eyes. Each day you open your heart. Every time you enter the great and small moments of your world with a sense of wonder, a taste for adventure, the way Hemingway made his way, boldly, earnestly, one of a kindly, through the wilds of his, its peaks and valleys, streams and plains, well-weathered woods, its sometimes dark and starless, sometimes star and moon bright nights, every place around a table, a crackling or embering fire, a circle of friends, or simply alone with your thoughts, your own words, silent and still anywhere, and you feel the bounty of the earth, breathe in its beauty, and feast on your life, it rises. W.S. Merwin. To the fire. How long I have been looking into you, staring through you into the other side, there is no way of telling. It appears to have continued from an age of its own, this scrutiny of the bright veil rising in the lit corridors of the embers in which I see the days beyond touch, beyond reach, beyond all understanding, beyond their faces, beneath your dangerous wings, you at whose touch everything changes, you who never change there, and you, one at a time, are the unknown days, turning the corners, the unseen past, the unrecognized present, familiar, but already beyond identity, expressions without selves, appearing finally within you, of whom the light is made. Thank you, Merwin. And one more from our poet Robinson Jeffers. Fire. Fire flickers on the deep hearth in the dark hall. The people have left it. No doubt they are sleeping. Fire all alone, the busy pleasure of its life, the little blonde dancers flinging their arms up, the gentle roar and incessant rustle and the embers dropping. The shadows of great gaunt stones in the walls dance up and down with it. The shadows of the stone pillars waver like reeds. How wise it is, living its rich red life. It cares not where, nor who watches, nor if no one watches. So as we come closer to a close for now, an invitation, open your hearth. Open your hearth, your heart, your earth, your ear of being, to everything deeply living, to everything deeply calling. Thomas McGrath. Beyond the Red River, the birds have flown their summer skies to the south, and the flower money is drying in the banks of bent grass which the bumblebee has abandoned. We wait for a winter lion, body of ice crystals and sombrero of dead leaves. A month ago, from the salt engines of the sea, a machinery of early storms rolled toward the holiday houses where summer still dozed in the poolside chairs, sipping an aging whiskey of distances and departures. Now the long freight of autumn goes smoking out of the land. My possibles are all packed up, but still I do not leave. I am happy enough here, where Dakota drifts wild in the universe, where the prairie is starting to shake in the surf of the winter dark. And one last fall equinox poem to share with you, to give to you. Eternal Rhythms. The sun moves south in a bright cross over the equator, over great rainforests, hunting tigers, hidden tribes. Horus entwines with Seth, Gwyn with Gwythyr, the holly king with the oak king. Light balances with darkness, night with day. Still warm land yields its last best fruits for harvest, while wicker men made of barley stems are set afire. While sacred corn, black, white, yellow, red, is ground and watered to life. While 7 looming faces made of stone look solemnly out to sea, gaze Easter islandly into sunset. A feathered serpent triangled with light, Father, Mother, Son, descends an unshaded pyramid. Mystics, too, descend within themselves to discover. Spirit enters waiting bodies, and at midnight Alcyone arrives and aligns incandescently from the Pleiades, and the earth, the whole earth, turns again to its eternal rhymes and rhythms. This last poem for now, for all of us, just written, very fresh, just the other day, for summer's end and autumn's beginning. It's called The Last Cricket. I was lying in the dark, hearing it, and the poem came into me. The Last Cricket. Sings a last song on the last night of the last day of summer. Sings out for the now leaving season. Sings up to a high shining harvest moon. Sings in to the arriving equinox, bringing through the clear light, crisp air, deep color of another autumn. And a last thought, again from Hearth, the book Hearth. It seems we humans, like whales and monarch butterflies, are programmed to return to or to seek places of refuge, nurture, and deep connection. But unlike butterflies and whales, we also keep asking questions about who we are, why we are here, where we came from, and where we are headed. All around the world, individuals, families, friends, and neighbors gather around a campfire or a computer, a kitchen table, or an auditorium stage to share ideas and warmth and often food. This book, we hope, may become one such gathering place where questions are asked that have no answers, but where the talk goes on and on, connecting us in peace and trust, keeping the fire alive. Thank you again for leaning in, floating and feeling in from many places in the world. Thank all of you who listen often and actively and appreciate what comes forth from my poetosphere, like these weekly programs. I'm glad I can help nourish spirits, uplift hearts, and heighten self-awareness and aliveness at a time more than ever, so needed, so wanted. If you valued this or an earlier program or want to support my wider poetic arts, I'd welcome your gift by PayPal or Venmo or directly through my site or by mail to me at P.O. Box 1032, Westerly, Rhode Island 02891. And any patrons wishing to host me on part of their own or another property as a working poet in residence to bring forth a fresh flight of poetic art and dedicate it to them, to you, please reach out and we'll explore. I also welcome fellow artists to collaborate with on projects theatrical to musical and producers, directors, or others seeking a poetic voice. Meanwhile, you can hear all of my broadcasts online as replays. I hope you'll lean in again next week, or soon again. Until then, dear listeners, here's to finding and feeling and feeding your deep inner fires, kindling your imaginations, coming together in firelit, candlelit, heartlit circles with others to share spirits and stories that make your time on earth all the more precious, human, and poignant. Goodbye for now, and good spirits.